Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I was drafted.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living down in Bentley, Kansas.
Why did you join?
I didn't join. I was drafted. My friends and neighbors chose me. It said so in a letter.
Why did you pick the service branch you joined?
I didn't pick it. I was drafted in the Army.
Do you recall your first day in service?
Yes, I do.
What did it feel like?
I felt like I was missing home because they was making me do things I didn't want to do. They took me in and gave me all new clothes, showed me how I was supposed to wear them, and then they showed me how to wash my floors around my bunk, and then I had to start learning how to march. They call that drilling.
Yeah. Tell me about your boot camp experiences.
Well, when I actually got into boot camp, they took me down to Fort Bliss, Texas. And, of course, the first few days that you're in the Army, why they get you up about 4:30 in the morning, and they get you outside and line you all up. They call it get formations. Then they would turn you, start running you, and you would run for about 3 or 4 miles. Then you'd end up at the mess hall, and then we'd eat breakfast. As soon as we finished breakfast, then we could go back to our barracks, and then we were supposed to clean up around our beds and our bunks, and then certain ones of us would be chosen for different details. Some of us would have to clean the latrines, for instance, and others would have to, I don't remember, do other things. Then we would fall back out into formation. And every morning we'd have what they call a police call, which was going out in groups of 8 and picking up papers, picking up trash off of the post. And then as soon as you finished police call, then you would fall back out, fall into a formation. Then they would start marching you. And they taught us how to march. They spent about 3 or 4 days teaching us how to march. And then they issued us rifles. Then we had to learn how to take that rifle apart and put it together. And after several times, we had to learn to do it blindfolded. We could take it apart and put it back together blindfolded, so that we could do it in the dark if we were in combat. So that's about the first part of it that I remember.
Do you remember your instructors?
Yeah, I remember a couple of them. The main drill sergeant was a Mexican fella. A little slight built guy, but he was pretty wiry, and I can't quite remember. Gonzalez, I believe, was his last name. I can't remember his first name anymore. But he was a pretty good guy. He worked pretty hard at teaching us how to be soldiers. And we had a first sergeant that was a great big Swede that he more or less was over the whole platoon, and he taught us how to drill with the rifle, taught us how to take care of it in the barracks, and he taught us how to put our clothes up and how to arrange our foot lockers and how to stand inspection and all these kind of things. So those 2 guys I remember pretty good.
What was your motivation to get through the boot camp?
Because I knew it was going to get easier when I finished boot camp when you got out on duty.
Which wars did you serve in?
Well, I got in about 6 weeks before the Korean War was over. So I was just finishing basic training, the first phase, when they signed the preliminary peace treaty. So the war was in effect over at that point. But they still kept people there in Korea for quite a while after that. But then they changed my orders from Korea, and I eventually ended up going to Boston, Massachusetts to serve up there in an early warning site.
Why did they keep people in Korea?
Because they still thought that the North Koreans was going to continue to fight. They kept security forces there to make sure that they didn't have another war.
Where exactly did you go?
Well, my first duty station after basic training, I went to, actually, it was Deer Island, which is an island out in Boston Bay, which is just off of Winthrop, Massachusetts. And there was a little anti-aircraft artillery post with about 80 people on it. And we had 4 artillery guns, and then they changed my trainings, and I started learning to be a radio operator. I ended up working in the radio section the rest of the time I was in.
Do you remember your arriving?
In my first duty station? Oh yeah, I remember it real well.
What were your surroundings like?
Well, it was, when I first got there was probably about 16, 18 inches of snow on the ground, because it was late winter. It was in March, and they still had quite a little bit of snow on the ground at that particular time. But the first day I was there in the afternoon, I played football, because they had a football team there at Fort Dawes, and they were quite good, and that officer that was in charge of our battery had been a college or a junior college coach, and he liked to coach football, so he put a football team together, and we ended up playing an awful lot of football games out of that fall, clear on up till we practiced all summer, and then we played in the fall, and we started actually in late August playing football, and we played till through November, and then I got shipped out to Iceland from there.
What was your duty there?
Well, I was a radio operator. That was what's supposed to be my job, but I did that and played football, both, so I'm not sure which. My job was really a radio operator.
Did you see combat?
No.
Were there many casualties in your unit?
No, I don't think so.
Tell me about a couple of your most memorable experiences.
Memorable? Oh, probably one of the most memorable experiences was when I got up to Iceland. We got there in late November, and it was almost 24 hours of dark for that time, and it was really really impressive to me when all you had was dark. Like you had about 20 hours of darkness, and maybe 4 hours of which would get partly light, and then it got worse gradually, clear on up till I can't remember. I think it was March when it finally started getting about normal days, like half dark and half light, and then we gradually worked up to where we had 24 hours of daylight, and that's pretty memorable.
Were you ever a prisoner of war?
No.
Tell me about your experiences in captivity and when. No.
I wasn't.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Just good conduct medal. I can't remember of anything else. I think I had another one, but I can't remember what it was now.
How did you get them?
Behaving myself.
Did you stay in touch with your family?
Yeah, with letters.
How? Oh, this explains it right there. What was your food like?
Well, in basic training, it wasn't too bad. It was, I had quite a bit of it, and it wasn't great food, but it was good enough. When we got up to Massachusetts, they had a couple of Italian guys for cooks, and they seasoned things totally different than I was used to eating them, and so it ended up being a lot of garlic and tomatoes and stuff like that with any meat dish that you had, and it gave me heartburn awful bad. I remember pretty near every meal that they'd cook, I'd end up with heartburn. That's when I started learning to eat Rolaids.
Did you have plenty of supplies?
Yeah, we always had plenty.
Did you feel any pressure or stress?
Well, yeah, because you get pressured because you never get to sleep very well. There's so many people in a barracks all together that there's always something going on, and I never could sleep real well. So unless I went someplace and stayed overnight off the base, I never really got a lot of good sleep.
Was there something special you did for good luck?
Not necessarily. I wasn't very superstitious.
So you didn't pray to God or anything?
Well, yeah, we did have church services every Sunday, and I went a lot of the time. I didn't go all the time, but I went quite a bit. And yeah, when times got tough, you pray to God.
Were there any entertainers there?
In Iceland, we had a couple of shows come through. Terry Moore brought that was a movie star at that time, brought a troupe of gals up there, and they had a comedian, and they had some singers and dancing gals, and they put on a good show. And before I left before I left Texas, they had a couple of shows there that we got to see, and I don't remember. Well, we had in Boston, they had a couple of 3 weekend dances on the base. They brought in an orchestra and let gals on the post, and we ended up having dances if you wanted to go. Things like that.
Sorry. What did you do when on leave?
Well, I come home basically just to rest. I think I took 2 different leaves. Well, let's see. I divided a 30 days furlough up into 3 sections. I took 15 days once, and I think I took about 20 days another time. And I just come home and laid around and rested and did things that I would do just for entertainment, because you was home on vacation. And then when I still had leave time coming when I got out of the Army, so they paid me for several days. I don't remember now. Several days of leave that I still had coming that I hadn't taken.
Where did you travel while in the service?
Well, I traveled several places. First of all, I saw quite a little bit of West Texas, and then New Mexico, where our firing ranges were over into White Sands, New Mexico, where that desert has the white sand. And then one weekend, went down to Carlsbad Caverns and went through the caverns with some guys. And a couple of weekends after we got through our first phase of basic, there was a Mexican boy had a car there. He had his own car. And he was from down in Mexico. And so we loaded up in his car, and he took us into Mexico about 50, 75 miles on down into Mexico, and showed us, we just drove around, and he showed us the sights and so forth. Of course, we all paid for his fuel and fed him and so forth for taking us.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual events?
No, there was always somebody doing something, or guys hiding each other's stuff, and then we had this one guy that was always going to sleep in the evening, and he'd snore so bad you couldn't hardly stand be in the place with him. And we'd be trying to play cards and he couldn't even think, but he'd stick his hands out, and we'd fill his hands up with shaving cream and tickle him on the nose, and then he'd cover himself up with shaving cream. That was a famous joke. A lot of people did that.
Was there other pranks that you pulled?
Oh, yeah, we hooked up fire hoses and knocked a guy down one day because he didn't want to take a bath, so we proceeded to give him a bath fire hose. I don't know if that was a prank, but
That's probably helping you out a lot.
we got tired of his smelling.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. What did you think of officers or fellow soldiers?
Oh, I liked most of the guys that I served with, and I got along pretty good with all the officers that I worked with. I didn't have any trouble. There was always some you liked better than others, guys that you served with.
Yeah, my best friends.
We had one officer in Iceland that was a second lieutenant that would come in through the National Guard, and he tried to show his authority and didn't really know what he was doing, and he was kind of an aggravation because we knew that he didn't even know what he was supposed to be doing, and yet he was out there trying to tell us what to do. And I can remember him. His name was Frost, and he was a pain in the frost.
Yeah. Did you keep a personal journal while you're
No, I didn't.
diary? You didn't?
No.
Do you recall the day your service ended?
You bet. I was at Camp Kilmer, New Jersey when I come back out of the Iceland. They took me there to separate me from the Army, and that's where I got my discharge, Camp Kilmer. I had to be there for about 2 weeks waiting on them to do it. And I got all kinds of nasty duties, like cleaning out the coal hot water heaters, hauling off the trash, washing dishes for hours, KP, and all those kind of good jobs.
What is KP?
That is kitchen police. That's taking care of the dirty dishes and cleaning up after the cooking. But they did that 24 hours a day in that place.
What did you do in the days and weeks afterward?
Well, the first week or 10 days, I come back and kind of rested up, and then I went back down to Grenada Air Conditioning Company and went back to work.
Was your education supported by the GI Bill?
Yeah, later on I went to barber school on the GI Bill.
Did you make any close friends while in the service?
Well, yeah, there was one guy that from Tennessee that I rode a few times, and we never did call each other, but we sent Christmas cards, and I don't know, after a year or so we quit doing that, and I've never had much to do with anybody else since.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war?
Well, I barbered after I finished, I worked at that electric motor factory, and then I worked at Boeing Aircraft for a little while. Then I went to barber school, and when I finished that, I barbered for a long time. And finally went to selling cars. Did that for quite a while, and
Now you're back to
Now
barbering.
I'm back to barbering.
Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Oh yeah, I learned to respect the military, and well, I didn't really know much about it until I went into it and learned what happens and what goes on, and it helps you realize that sometimes war is necessary, and that it's also really frustrating to have to go sometimes.
Did you join a veterans organization?
I did join the American Legion for a while. But
what kinds of activities does your post or association have?
well, they had weekend dances, and they had feeds and stag suppers and things like that. And I've let my membership lapse. I don't participate anymore.
Do you attend reunions?
No.
How did your service and experience affect your life?
Well, you learn a lot of things from being around the different kinds of people in the military. You start getting a background from everybody, and you learn how to, well, just the fact that you're with that many more people, different kinds of people and different races of people, you just learn to respect people more.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
Well, I might tell you about one thing that went on that I saw in Iceland while I was there, how quick the weather can change in that area. That there was a stream up in Qualifjord where I was stationed for a little while. It was over the winter, and it changed. The temperature changed so drastically over one night period that there was a stream that had a waterfall, and the water went out about 12, 15 feet from the fall, and before it started back down because it was running down the mountain so fast. And it was running when I went to bed at night. When I woke up the next morning, that stream was frozen solid, hanging out over the rocks. The temperature dropped that fast.